Welcome back. This is part 5 of our wash rendering demo. Today we're going to be covering some troubleshooting miscellaneous items as well as how to get our ground and horizon to function properly spatially. I'm going to be kind of all over the place, so it's not going to be a linear lesson like these last ones have been. This has been drying for the weekend, and that's good because then I can see and compare lots of different things, as well as take a look at my watercolors that have dried out. You can see the kind of Sahara Desert cracking. And I've started to reactivate my lightest because I need to finish this gradient over here. I only got 3 steps in. I need to finish that. That buckling you can see is because I just did a clear wash over that whole thing to start activating that paper. And this little puddle here is working out the right proportion or color value to get this back to its original matching state. We took all that time to measure all the water, which is great. That's wonderful. Like I said in the previous lessons, it's really good to do everything as much all in one as possible. So this is a nice opportunity to discuss this potential problematic situation and just kind of walk you through, because it's inevitable that you're not going to be able to finish everything all in one. That's just life. And especially as you start working on final projects, there's details. You have all sorts of things to juggle. So it's important to have this skill as well. So what I did was, with my scooper that I was using, I got some water and just started gently reactivating. Of course, there was some back and forth, and there probably still is, maybe a little bit. But what you're seeing here is the trial and error after about 3 or 4 different versions of getting this puddle back. At first it was too light, so I added some dark. And then it was too dark, and then, right? So, because this first top square here is our lightest value, that gives us a good key to work off of when we're going back. Hopefully that makes sense. That's a very important thing, and building keys into your work, it doesn't have to be specific all the time. It's nice to have this because we need that lightest value to finish off this. As you can see, we'll come back to that. I distracted myself. It's nice to have this key, but if I was trying to key something like the sky here, it's fine. I can just pick a point and maybe down at the horizon, the lightest, and then up here, the darkest, and then just work in between that. Right now, I only have one thing of blue. We're not going to be doing a whole lot of blue, just a little bit down here. What I was about to say here is that you can see the gradient isn't really noticeable. Here, this is a nice gradient. We are getting the kind of particulate granulation. That's unfortunate. But overall, it has a nice even step. You can notice how it fits within the lines here to the left, how each one is a significant but yet not distracting jump. There's not a hard break here. Those are things we watch out for. So this one is going to take more washes. I think the top part is fine. I'm probably mostly okay with that second one. The third one is where it starts losing. I don't know, we'll see. I'm just kind of walking through things that I'm noticing that you guys should also be aware of as you're thinking through these things. Another step of good practice, I have 2 different waters that I use to clean my brushes. This bigger lower one is for the brown, and the top one is for blue. I picked them in size because we're going to be using more brown than blue today, so I need the bigger reservoir to wash my brush. but I arranged them in order top to bottom because, like we talked about in previous lessons, I try to set up everything up front so that I don't have to think along the way. I know that blue recedes and is farther back in space, brown proceeds and comes forward in space. So that's how I'm doing the arranging. If I was perhaps doing yellow and red, where I had some kind of yellow, but it was a smaller amount I was going in the foreground, I'd be happy to switch up these reservoirs just to remember I don't need as much of this color. I'm going to use more of this color, but spatially this one is in front of this one. So that just helps me reinforce as I'm painting, oh yeah, I'm thinking spatially. I want to push this one back. I want this one to come forward. Let's see, what else? Oh yeah, I did a clear coat down here in the ground level. I didn't do this entire thing. I know in one of the previous videos I said when you reactivate the water, or the paper, I'm sorry, that you give a clear coat to the whole area you're going to paint. And I didn't do that. I went up to about here, and very, very importantly, I left out the building because I'm not painting the building right now. And so if I did the building, and here I am doing a wash, even though I would be really careful and trying to go around the building, if the building was wet, it would just soak up all that pigment, right? And then I'd be scrambling to get my paper towel and try to dry, and I'd probably lift up the old paint. So it's very important to think, even in that clear coat reactivation stage, think about the space you're going to be painting, the actual space. It's this kind of U shape that goes around the building, and it does break the horizon. Even though I'm not painting up into the sky, I want that water to be able to gently flow up. Even though the board here is at an angle, it's still, you'll notice the more you do this, the pigment still can creep up and defy the law of gravity. It's the capillary effect pulling the pigment up and around. Okay, wow, that was 7 minutes already and we haven't even started painting. All right, I am not going to bring you guys with me as I work out this gradient. Know that optically, these two things need to match. These two columns need to match. And they kind of play off of each other. Find the one that's working better and play to that strength. Notice this is not very dark, and that's okay. Like I said before, there's not a set value scale, but it should be a noticeable stepping. It should not just be, I don't know, that's a nice gradient in the sky. I was hoping I would have like the ground here. That's pretty flat. So your gradient should be a gradient and not just flat. All right. So we want to go darker on the ground. Remember the things that are closest to us are higher contrast and they are darker. Things, oof, that was close. I started into that building. I dripped. Oof. I don't know if, yeah, you can see there's some color in this. That's just left over from my brush. That's actually a really good point to make, that when you're doing a clear coat or the first start of whatever you're doing, as long as you're doing the whole thing, then it's fine to have a little tint in there. Kind of like if we were using this first top color and I wanted to reactivate that paper, it's something to be careful of. It can be a detriment sometimes, because if I had a really nice gradient and then I had something left over in my brush that didn't get rinsed out, I could just flatten that gradient. That would suck. You're probably saying, you're going uphill. You can't do that. I can do whatever I want, gosh. You're right, I can't. I'm going to do something that's a little tricky. I shouldn't have done that. I was not paying attention. I rinsed out my brush and I washed or dried most of it out because I don't want to deposit a big drop of water right here because it would just flood that whole thing. So what I'm going to do is use my brush like a vacuum, pull out that stuff along the bottom like I need to anyway, and I'm going to bring it up. Going backwards is a good way to mess things up. This is what I get for talking. I am still seeing a line right here. That might be because it's damp and colors have stronger contrast when they're wet, but it might be because there's more pigment up there that I've been pushing uphill. So I'm gonna keep doing my fade. I'm gonna rinse my brush and I'm gonna dry it off. Today is a troubleshooting day, I guess. So be smarter than me. Start your clear coat up here and then deposit in your gradient. This is a good example of why I try to be so methodical. I get thrown off track. While that is drying, that's still too wet. While that's drying, I want to think about what I want to do here. I just put down a very light coat, but really what I want to do is now go back into the water that we just put down, that wash, and I want to darken it. So we have the lightest color here. That wash I just did, I'm going to use as my damp. Yeah, that's okay. I'm going to start up here at the horizon. And it's okay if that brown breaks the horizon line a little bit. That's part of atmospheric perspective. It's that dust that's getting kicked up from the ground. Okay. Now, because I don't want this bottom getting too heavy, it's already starting to break that bottom border. I'm going to take the strongest contrast so you can see how it compares. That's the lightest up, and that's the darkest. So I'm going to drop it just below the horizon in hopes that, like here, it will creep up. And then I'm going to bring it down my goal is to create a nice dark ground for this building to sit on. I might want it to be darker than the building itself. This technique is called wet into wet. So what's happening right now is I'm blending some watercolor technique into the wash rendering. I tend to think of watercolor as being more artistic and free, and wash rendering being more constrained and very methodical. I'm going right along that border to help suck up. I'm being careful not to rub because I'm nervous that the wet, if I rub the top of that paper, it will peel off that top layer of the paper. Wow, okay, words today. Rinsing and drying my brush while this sets up. It's going to be stronger now than when it dries. And I want it to be darker still. On the next pass, what I want to do is reverse this, just like we did with the sky. I'm going to use blue. When you add the blue with the brown, it creates a darker version of the brown, depending on the proportions that you use. You can use the darkness of the blue to give more contrast to the brown, but if you use too much blue, of course it becomes blue, and then it's like, why is there blue grass in the foreground when the blue should be sitting spatially behind everything else? So that's a recipe that we have to be careful with. Maybe I think what I'll do is stop the video right now. This is long enough as it is. I'm going to work on this while this dries. Another thing, another methodical thing to watch out for is if you have your hand on the paper, which you shouldn't, you should just be floating above it. But if you have, in this situation, something you painted on the right, if I was to rest my hand on the paper, I could very easily come into that area I just painted and make a mess. We don't want to do that. All right. I thought this was going to be the end, and we're close. This is real easy. Or at least it's simple. Maybe not easy. Good luck. We'll probably post another one as we wrap this up.